Alrighty, hey, welcome to this video on the Clotting Cascade, aka Haemostasis. For some of you, this might be your first video you're watching on high yield stuff. High yield stuff is basically the stuff that gets examined a lot, the stuff that's important to focus your revision on. So this is a topic that is important to focus your revision on. It's kind of one of the juicier topics they like to examine. It also can seem a little bit overwhelming. There's like lots of factors, lots of numbers to learn, lots of kind of diseases, but we'll get through it. Also, you might want to watch this in 2 times speed or 3 times speed maybe, because you know I daydream a lot between my sentences. But yeah, this is I'll try and keep this short. See, I'm daydreaming there. I'll try and keep this short and to the point, hopefully. But it might end up being a little bit on the longer side. All right. So I want you to kind of close your eyes and imagine this situation of your childhood. You're running through a playground, you're having the time of your life, and then boom, you hit a brick wall. Bang your head, you crack your elbow open, blood is pouring everywhere, and before you know it, you're now sat in the school's nurse's office crying your eyes out, and obviously the school nurse comes along, hands you one of those manky blue tissues and a sticker that says "I've been brave," and just as you are applying your sticker and that tissue is disintegrating into those little tiny manky blue pieces, magically your cut has now stopped bleeding without you having it even realizing, and what you've just witnessed without even knowing is the clotting cascade and the coagulation cascade, haemostasis. So we're going to go into more detail how that happens. The first step how that happens is vasoconstriction. So you've got your ouchie, and your blood vessels local to the area are going to constrict to stop the blood flow, which means you don't lose blood, which is good because then you don't die. The next step of hemostasis is plugging this bleed with something called platelets, which I'm sure is something you've heard of, and this forms very simply the platelet plug. What they do is once you get one platelet that's been activated that knows, yo, it's time to get, to plug this this hole. It's going to come and recruit other ones to be like, yo, there's a problem here, let's get a move on. And also they attach to something on the vessel wall called the Willebrand Factor, which kind of anchors them in place. This is an example of positive feedback. So positive feedback is something that you might have heard before. Negative feedback is when you're turning off a stimulus. A stimulus is going to turn off something else. Positive feedback is when something happens and it's going to recruit more and more and more stuff to happen like that. So that's your positive feedback, and the platelet plug is a good example of that. Okay, thirdly, in our hemostasis kind of steps, we're going to have something called the clotting cascade. The whole point of this is to reinforce that platelet plug and make it nice and strong with something called fibrin. And the fourth stage, which is kind of much briefer, is at the end you don't want your platelet plug and your nice strong enforced platelet plug to be there forever, because obviously that can cause problems later on down the line. So later on you're going to have something called fibrinolysis, which is the breakdown of that platelet plug. So far so good. We're gonna just for visual learners here, this is kind of what we said happens with a platelet plug. So you've got your algae, and attached to the vessel wall you're going to have something called von Willebrand Factor. Now this guy is important for other stuff as well later on. He's a wingman for something else, but he also has this role here in terms of making the platelet plug kind of aggregate. So he acts kind of as an anchor, and then he allows platelets to kind of bind, and through positive feedback lots more platelets are going to be activated and bind to von Willebrand Factor, which is stuck to the vessel wall. We said, however, this is too weak to kind of support itself, so something needs to kind of join it together to be like a glue. What's that thing called? That is called fibrin. And this yellow thing here this is all made by something called the clotting coagulation cascade. So why we need the coagulation cascade is to make the fibrin to kind of glue the platelets together. Okay, so the point of the clotting cascade, I think it's useful to start with kind of the endpoint. The endpoint, what are we trying to do with these, all these different factors that I'm going to talk about. The point is to make something called a cross-linked fibrin clot, platelet plug, so that can make it kind of nice and strong, so that plug is not going anywhere. So this is kind of what we said. I'm representing it here in these yellow dots. Okay, so there are 2 pathways that make the fibrin, the intrinsic and the extrinsic, you guessed it, pathway. These both result, they have their own kind of steps, but common to the end of both of them, they both have the common end product of making factor 10, and then they convert it into something called 10A, the activated form of factor 10. Also, by the way, for these coagulation stuff, you don't write it as the number 10, you write it as the Roman things, so that would be an X. But the thing is, I don't really know Roman numerals, so yeah, I'm just going with English stuff because my brain doesn't work that way. So both these pathways converge by converting factor 10 to factor 10A, which means the activated form. Then this is going to go on, do some more fancy magic stuff, and then eventually make fibrin, and then we've got our nice reinforced platelet plug. So hopefully you understand that the point of the intrinsic and extrinsic pathways is to make this, so don't get lost in the details. Okay, let's talk about the intrinsic pathway first. This happens when your blood is exposed to collagen. So collagen is released upon injury. Collagen is something that makes up the basement membrane of your vessels. So if your vessels have been injured, now there's going to be collagen that has escaped from the basement membrane into the blood itself. This collagen is going to convert a factor called factor 12. It's important to know the names of these factors, into something called activated factor 12. Again, remember these are in Roman numerals, but maybe that's XAA, I think. But yeah. Okay. So factor 12, why have I written here? Well, it's neat for the intrinsic pathway because basically what's going to happen, you're going to have a lot of factors that are going to activate one another, eventually leading to 10 being converted into 10A, which is then going to do its stuff. There's a neat way to remember it, that the last kind of letters of the previous factor will make up the first letters of the next factor. What does that mean? So 12 kind of ends in like E, so the next factor is going to be 11, and you can kind of see like 11. So this is a nice memory aid, and you do need to remember this. It's a very like exam kind of favorite thing to get you to fill these in. So 12A, activated factor 12, is going to convert factor 11. So factor 11 is just floating in the blood, but it needs 12A to come along and convert it into 11A. The end of 11 is 9, so the next thing is going to be 9. So 9 is, factor 9 is floating along just like 11, and 11A comes along and is like, yo, get moving, converts it into 9A. The end of 9 is 8, and this is an important factor in the intrinsic pathway, you'll see why in a minute. 8 is going to be converted to what? I've forgotten. 8A. Okay, and finally 8A will come along to factor 10, which is floating in your blood, and activate it into factor 10A. So it's not too bad so far, but don't worry, it gets worse. So this kind of thing is measured, this intrinsic pathway. The time that it takes for collagen being exposed to factor 12 all the way to kind of make fibrin is called the activated partial thromboplastin time, abbreviated as APTT. That's an important one to know. Now factor 8 has a wingman called von Willebrand Factor. He's a cofactor. You might want to think back, where have we met him before? So we've met him before. He's the guy that anchors the platelet plug to the vessel wall. He also has another role, so he's a good wingman. He's got multiple jobs, and he's a wingman for factor 8 as well. Basically, factor 8 needs von Willebrand factor in order to be made. So you can imagine that if there's a defect, if someone has unfortunately has a defect in this factor, what does it mean? They're not going to be able to make factor 8, which means they won't be able to make factor 8A, which means they won't be able to convert on this side, on the intrinsic side, 10 to 10A, which means basically they're going to bleed more, right? Because essentially you're getting less fibrin being made, so your clot is weaker. Hopefully that makes sense. So factor 8 is now going to be low in von Willebrand disease. It's autosomal, so that's the inheritance pattern. So what does autosomal mean? So remember, there's your sex chromosomes in every cell, and then there's your normal, the rest of your chromosomes are your normal chromosomes, and those are your autosomes. So the von Willebrand disease will be inherited on your normal kind of chromosomes, and it comes in both flavors. Unfortunately, it comes in the dominant form, so that means you only need one copy, and that's luckily that's an alright kind of thing to have. It's mild, and basically the symptom is easy bruising at the surface. The recessive form is rarer, so generally recessive diseases are rarer because you need 2 copies, but it's nasty. It causes something called haemophillia, and it's not sweet like a rose, but you might want to think of like the word arthritis, which means joints, right? So this means heme is blood in your joints. Basically, you get large bulges of blood in your joints. These can be extremely painful, and also, importantly, you can measure this by seeing your activated partial thromboplastin time, i.e. the time to make fibrin from the intrinsic pathway is going to increase. So this is like a blood test you can see. Basically it means that it will take longer for this person to form a clot, which means they may lose more blood, for example. Okay, that is mostly the intrinsic pathway done. There's a few other tidbits I'm going to add here. So there's another disease called haemophillia. Haemophillia, you might have heard of. This is also can be fatal. And it's when you can kind of bleed to death because you don't have these factors that are needed to make fibrin. So if you have a cut, it can be kind of fatal. This is X-linked. Remember, so X is your one of your sex chromosomes. You have X and Y. Only males have Y. So X-linked recessive, which means you only need 1 copy of that. And so remember, I said only males have a Y chromosome, which means they only have 1 X chromosome. So it means that males, because they only inherit 1 X chromosome, this is a bit techy, so if you don't understand it, don't worry about it. But because males only inherit 1 X chromosome, then they automatically, you know, they will automatically have the disease. So it's X-linked recessive, which means that basically all males will be affected if it's passed down. But for females, you'll need the copy on both copies of your X. So it's rarer in females. And again, this is going to cause a defect in two factors, 8 and 9, which is going to cause your APTT to rise for the same reason that this is going to cause this to rise. It's going to take longer to form fibrin. Okay, so I mentioned briefly there's two types of haemophilia. There's Haemophillia A, and the way I remember it, it affects factor 8. So it's a deficiency in factor 8. The way I remember it, I just call it Haemophilia 8 in my head, so it sounds like factor 8. And the other one is Haemophilia B, which affects factor 9. Both of these are deficiencies in them, and they can kind of, as I said, they can be fatal, affecting males. Okay, that's the intrinsic done and dusted. The extrinsic thing is much simpler, thankfully. It's measured in something called prothrombin time, and later on you might hear of something called INR. INR is basically like a mathematical derivation of this. So you can imagine prothrombin time is the time it takes for this pathway to form fibrin. Okay, so unlike collagen being released to the blood vessels, the extrinsic pathway is activated by trauma, causing direct release of something called tissue factor. So you have your blood vessel here. On the outside, you have something called tissue factor, and then trauma is going to cause tissue factor to be released within the blood vessel itself. So tissue factor is then going to go along, and it's going to find a factor called factor 7 that's just kind of chilling normally, floating around. When factor 7 reacts with tissue factor, it's like, yo, there's a problem, let's fix up. So 7 is going to become activated 7 into, 7A. Again, you're doing these in the Roman kind of thingies. So that's how you remember it with this guy here. And essentially 7A is then going to activate 10 to convert factor 10 into 10A. So that's all you have to know for the extrinsic pathway. It's much, much simpler. Your body makes a natural thing called tissue factor pathway inhibitor. So this is tissue factor. And if it's inhibiting this, what's it going to do? It's going to stop 7 being turned into 7A, which means that your prothrombin time, which is your time for the tissue factor release to make fibrin, is going to be longer, right? Because this is being inhibited by your by a natural kind of thing made by the liver. Let me just check something. Yeah, that's fine. Cool. Great. Sorry about that. Okay. So we've done our intrinsic and our extrinsic pathway. Finally, here they both merge and converge onto a common pathway, with 10A being like the common end product of both of them, hopefully, as you can see. So these kind of pathways are happening simultaneously. Now 10A is going to go on to something called the final common pathway. So both these factors, it doesn't matter which way it started. Sorry, it doesn't matter which way you started. These are both going to feed eventually into the final common pathway, which is going to do its magic, release fibrin, and then voila, we're happy. So 10A is going to meet a guy called 5A, who's also having to float around, and they're going to work some magic. So I'll tell you about this magic. Basically, there's a molecule, and you know, like there's Russian dolls where there's like a big Russian doll and then a small one, then an even smaller one. This is the Russian dolls of blood. So on the outside you have something called prothrombin, and then the middle Russian doll is called thrombin, and then the juicy goodness right in the middle, like the Kinder Surprise, is called the fibrin. And remember, fibrin is the stuff, the juice that we're trying to unlock. Okay, so we've got this thing here. What's it called? I've forgotten. It's called prothrombin, aka factor 2. You need to know that it has both those names. So remember, 10A is now activated. 10A is going to join with a factor that it's found called 5A, and this is the final common pathway, and it's going to extract this thrombin from prothrombin. Remember I said in medicine, generally precursors to things have the word pro in front of them. Maybe I didn't say that, but I'm saying that now. Now also, a big question is with thrombin, is it a coincidence, or did I plan it, that the thrombin looks like the Greggs logo? That's one for you to think about, but you know, I do love me a cheese and onion pasty. Anyways, prothrombin is cleaved by factor 10A and 5A working together as a happy couple into thrombin. Thrombin is then going to be cleaved into fibrin by our factor called factor 1. Also, you might be thinking, oh, why are they in like some crazy order? Why is 1 at the end and then followed by 13? It's because these are the order that they were discovered in. So anyway, thrombin is cleaved by fibrinogen, aka factor 1. So factor 1 cleaves this into fibrin. Fibrin, we finally unlocked our fibrin after all this. And obviously you're measuring this time here in your APTT. So the time, the APTT measures from collagen all the way 10, 5, 2, and 1 to make fibrin. So we've now made our fibrin, and the same thing with PT. You're measuring from 7, 8, from tissue factor release, from 7 to 10. How long does it take to make 10A? How long does it take for all this to happen up to here? Okay, So we made fibrin. Fibrin is finally gonna meet a guy called factor 13A, activated 13A, and this is gonna do the last piece of magic. It's gonna bash fibrin together with your platelet plug and make it the reinforced cross-linked platelet plug. So we've now ended up with our cross-linked platelet plug. There's a bit more stuff to more details, but have a break if you're no, this is too much. I don't want to overwhelm you. So fibrin, once we've kind of released it from thrombin via factor 1, it's going to go on to activate 8A, 5A, and also 11A via something called positive feedbacks. So it's going to make more of them in the blood. Where did I mention positive feedback before? I can't remember. Have a think about it and rack your brains. But this is your second example of positive feedback in your hemostasis kind of cascade. And again, you need to know that this is positive feedback. It's going to go on to activate 8A again, as I said, 5A and 11A, make these more abundant, and then you're getting essentially more of this happening. This can happen faster, more fibrin can be made, so your clot can be sealed really nice and fast. Okay, the final common pathway, you can kind of see why it's the final common pathway. It's common between both of these. This includes factors 5, 10, 2, and 1, all the way to make fibrin. And so this is measured in something called thrombin time, aka TT. Okay, we're almost done with the pathways. There's just a little bit more. Some of these factors require vitamin K to work. There's a sentence here. Now you need to know you need to memorize the sentence, but you don't need to know what it means. Essentially, vitamin K is needed to make these guys. But the sentence you need to remember is that it's needed in the liver for gamma carboxylation of N-terminal glutamic acid. Yeah, it's a mouthful, but I don't know, just remember it, unfortunately. And it's essentially needed to make the precursors essentially for the factors 2, 7, 9, and 10. So I've just put a K by the factors that have required this. So learn this, please. Learn the ones that require vitamin K. And the way I can remember it, maybe this is helpful, maybe this is not. Remember that 2 plus 7 is 9. But then if you're bad at maths, you might think it's 10 as well. So 2, 7, 9, 10 are vitamin K. The next thing that is also needed is calcium. And I don't have like a way to remember this, but it's needed for factors 9, 10, 7, thrombin, and 13A. So 13A, thrombin, 10, 9, and 7. The important thing here is that it's required for 13A. This is like the most important thing. So when 13A is whacking the fibrin together with the platelet plug, it's going to whack it. It needs calcium in order to do that. So you need calcium. So calcium deficiencies can also cause problems with like bleeding times and stuff. Okay. Unfortunately, there's a little bit more, but we're almost done. So 8A and 5A are inactivated by natural things called protein C and also protein S cofactor. These guys are produced naturally in the body when your body kind of doesn't want to clot as much, and it's going to come along and inactivate 8A and 5A, put big fat X through them, and it's going to stop these guys from working. Which is what's that going to do? It's going to increase this whole pathway here, the intrinsic pathway time, which means it's going to increase your APTT. Now, also the thing is that factor C and protein S, these also require vitamin K as well in order to work. Okay. There's kind of like almost like an equivalent as well, called anti-thrombin, also the drug heparin. So heparin is a drug clinically given to people who are at risk of clots. So for example, if you go on like a plane for a long time, you can get something called DVT, which is when your blood pools in your legs. And if you've heard of Virtuous Triad, there'll be another stuff on that maybe. But basically stagnant blood is not good. So the stagnant blood can start to clot on a long time just sitting down on a plane, which can obviously cause a stroke. So in hospital they can give something called heparin, and the natural equivalent that your kind of liver makes is something called anti-thrombin. These both work together to inhibit factor 10A, not factor 10, but there's just no space, and also thrombin. And by inhibiting them, they're going to stop these guys working. You can see that they're affecting the final common pathway things, so they're going to increase thrombin time in both of these. So again, anti-thrombin, or giving the drug heparin, will inhibit 10A and also inhibit thrombin. So essentially we're reducing the amount of fibrin being formed. Okay, I said that was it. That is it for the Clotting Cascade. We're on our last stage of hemostasis now, which is, I believe me, much shorter. We said it's fibrinolysis when you want to break down that clot. Okay, hopefully you remember now that the point of the Clotting Cascade is complex, but remember the point, don't get lost in the details as well. Obviously the details, unfortunately, they're important, but the point is that the Clotting Cascade is required to cross-link stuff. So that's our fibrin here. So we're now talking about breaking this down. So this is going to be like, you know, a week later or a few days later, for example, when our clot is kind of healed. So we have something naturally occurring called plasminogen, and your body is going to release something called TPA and PAL1. These are important to know. And this is going to cause this plasminogen to turn into plasmin. Plasmin can then act as like a kind of like an enzyme almost. It can break down this fibrin mesh into kind of little fragments, and finally the fragments, you need to know this, they are cleaved by proteases in the kidney and liver, and then just kind of excreted or dealt with normally. That's everything I wanted to talk about. So